Clean like a dove. Yes, we all are. Well, let's take a look at the impact of corruption on the country's social systems and how it affects economic growth. Sustainability and leadership expert Camaren Peter joins us from our Cape Town studio. Camaren, thanks so much for your time. Let's break this down for our viewers. Let's focus on corruption in government first and how exactly that affects people in South Africa.
Well, the impacts of corruption are primarily through how it affects the state. And the state is affected in three key ways. Firstly, corruption affects the ability of the state to be able to deliver on its key functions and mandates to society. So whether we look at service delivery, things like water, housing, energy, roads and waste management, sanitation, all these things are affected when you have manipulation of tenders and the wrong people essentially doing the service delivery on the ground as a result of corruption. It also erodes the ability of the state to function effectively. So we have large municipal financing and spending gaps at the local level. So what that means is that at the local level, they're not getting enough money from government, but the money that they are getting, they aren't spending effectively. So there's a gap in terms of delivering to people. The other thing is that in order for corruption to thrive, good people are hounded out of the public sector. Often their jobs are made untenable, or trumped-up charges are brought against them, and they are suspended and put on leave so that they are out of the way and can't make decisions, and they incur huge legal costs in trying to fight these battles from within the system, so they eventually leave. What this does, thirdly, is it then reinforces a model of authoritarian leadership. And when you have this kind of authoritarian leadership, people are less likely to speak out, and they are more likely to do as they're told. So you have a lot of people in the public sector keep their heads down and just follow orders, even if those orders go against what they're supposed to be doing, even if they're fraudulent or corrupt. In the long term, what this does is it strangles the ability of the state to be able to self-regulate, because people aren't speaking out. You can't identify corruption. Everyone's keeping their heads down. And you end up in a situation where people can't reorientate the state onto a positive trajectory. This has massive impacts because our state is extremely well paid, it's very highly qualified, and it's well transformed. It's the key platform through which we can stimulate economic growth, service the public sector as well as the private sector, and get the country on a positive growth track. So corruption has very real impacts, and it's primarily through the ability of the state to deliver.
Let's talk about whether corruption in the state has ultimately led to a delay in poverty alleviation in South Africa. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the symptoms of this since 2009 is we've seen an uptick, and a drastic uptick in service delivery protests at the local level. Of course, these are not always about service delivery. They're about corruption and all manner of other governance failures. But symptomatically, we have seen a major uptick in violent service delivery protests and civil disobedience. And there's major frustration at local levels. But it's also evidenced through the number of corruption cases that have been identified, not just around the Guptas and the state-owned enterprises, but all the way down to the local levels. Recently, when the opposition took control of the other metropoles, the other major metropoles in the country, there are a lot of exposés. Also, the job that the press is doing is exposing these corrupt practices. We've seen a rapid escalation in them. So I think it's fair to say that it is hampering poverty alleviation, it's hampering service delivery, and the people who are most weak and most vulnerable are suffering the most as a result of this.
And the private sector, of course, you look at price fixing, things that affect the everyday man on the street, costs going up because of price fixing. What's the responsibility of the private sector when it comes to corruption and the effects it has on society?
The private sector cannot be given a free pass here, because they are part and parcel of the corruption that we see in the state. Often it's collusion between these actors for securing large tenders, for securing large contracts, that the private sector has also worked around the rules and broken the rules. And we've seen this with the Steinhoff case recently, where essentially the same kind of authoritarian leadership model that I'm speaking about in the state can take hold in companies and the private sector, where people don't ask the hard questions that they need to. And so you have people who are able to get away with making decisions that they should never have been able to make if they were properly regulated by their boards and if oversight was being properly conducted.
All right, thank you so much for your time and insight. We do appreciate it. That was sustainability and leadership expert Camaren Peter. We'll take a short break. We'll continue.